Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Thud by Terry Pratchett. Part 3. Vimes eased himself into his chair and looked at the damned vampire. She could have passed for 16. It was certainly hard to believe that she was not a lot younger than Vimes. She had short hair, which Vimes had never seen on a vampire before, and looked, if not like a boy, then like a girl who wouldn't mind passing for one. Sorry about the remark down there, he said. It's not been a good week, and it's getting worse by the hour. You don't have to be frightened, said Sally. If it's any help, I don't like this any more than you do. I am not frightened, said Vimes sharply. Sorry, Mr. Vimes. You smelled frightened. Not badly, she added, but just a bit, and your heart is beating faster. I am sorry if I have offended. I was just trying to put you at your ease. Vimes leaned back. Don't try to put me at my ease, Miss Von Humperdinck, he said. It makes me nervous when people do that. It's not as though I have any ease to be put at. And do not comment on my smell either. Thank you. Oh, and it's Commander Vimes. Or Sir. Understand? Not Mr. Vimes. And I would prefer to be called Sally, said the vampire. They looked at each other, both aware that this was not going well, both uncertain that they could make it go any better. So, Sally, you want to be a copper, said Vimes. A policeman? Yes. Any history of policing in your family? Said Vimes. It was a standard opening question. It always helped if they'd inherited some idea about coppering. No, just the throat biting, said Sally. There was another pause. Vimes sighed. Look, I just want to know one thing, he said. Did John, not a vampire at all, Smith, and Doreen Winkings put you up to this? No, said Sally. I approached them. And if it's any help to you, I didn't think there'd be all this fuss either. Vimes looked surprised. But you applied to join, he said. Yes, but I don't see why there has to be all this interest. Don't blame me. That was your League of Temperance. Really? Your Lord Veterinary was quoted in the newspaper, said Sally. All that stuff about the lack of species discrimination being in the finest traditions of the watch. Ha! Said Vimes. Well, it's true that a copper's a copper, as far as I'm concerned, but the fine traditions of the watch, Miss Von Humperdinck, largely consist of finding somewhere out of the rain, mumping for free beer round the backs of pubs, and always keeping 2 notebooks. You don't want me then, said Sally. I thought you needed all the recruits you could get. Look, I'm probably stronger than anyone on your payroll who isn't a troll. I'm quite clever. I don't mind hard work, and I've got excellent night vision. I can be useful. I want to be useful. Can you turn into a bat? She looked shocked. What? What kind of question is that to ask me? Probably amongst the less tricky ones, said Vimes. Besides, it might be useful. Can you? No. Oh. Well, never mind. I can turn into a lot of bats, said Sally. One bat is hard to do because you have to deal with changes in body mass. And you can't do that if you've been reformed for a while. Anyway, it gives me a headache. What was your last job? Didn't have one. I was a musician. Vimes brightened up. Really? Some of the lads have been talking about setting up a watch band. Could they use a cello? Probably not. Vimes drummed his fingers on the desk. Well, she hadn't gone for his throat yet, had she? That was the problem, of course. Vampires were fine right up until the point where suddenly they weren't. But, in truth, right now, he had to admit it. He needed anyone who could stand upright and finish a sentence. This damn business was taking its toll. He needed men out there all the time, just to keep the lid on things. Oh, right now it was just scuffles and stone throwing and breaking windows and running away. But all that stuff added up like snowflakes on an avalanche slope. People needed to see coppers at a time like this. They gave the illusion that the whole world hadn't gone insane. And the Temperance League were pretty good and very supportive of their members. It was in the interests of them all that no one found themselves standing in a strange bedroom with an embarrassingly full feeling. They'd be watching her. We've got no room for passengers in the watch, he said. We're too pressed right now to give you any more than what is laughingly known as on-the-job training. But you'll be on the streets from day one. How are you with the daylight thing? I'm fine with long sleeves and the wide brim. I carry the kit, anyway. Vimes nodded. A small dustpan and brush, a phial of animal blood, and a card saying, Help! I have crumbled and I can't get up. Please sweep me into a heap and crush vile. I am a black ribboner and will not harm you. Thanking you in advance. His fingers rattled on the desktop again. She returned his stare. All right, you're in, Vimes said at last. On probation, to start with. Everyone starts that way. Sort out the paperwork with Sergeant Littlebottom downstairs. Report to Sergeant Detritus for your gear and orientation lecture. And try not to laugh. And now you've got what you want, and we're not being official. Tell me why. Pardon? Said Sally. A vampire wanting to be a copper? Said Vimes, leaning back in his chair. I can't quite make that fit, Sally. I thought it would be an interesting job in the fresh air, which would offer opportunities to help people, Commander Vimes. Said Vimes. If you can say that without smiling, you might make a copper after all. Welcome to the job, Lance Constable. I hope you have... The door slammed. Bang! Captain Carrot took 2 steps into the room, saw Sally and hesitated. Lance Constable von Humpending has just joined us, Captain, said Vimes. Fine. Hello, miss, said Carrot quickly, and turned to Vimes. Sir, someone's killed Ham Crusher. Morpork's finest, strolled back down towards the yard. "What I do," said Nobby, "is cut the painting up into little bits like, a few inches across."
"That's diamonds, Nobby. It's how you get rid of stolen diamonds."
"All right then. How about this one? You cut the mural up into bits the size of ordinary paintings, okay? Then you paint a painting on the other side of each one and put them in frames and leave them around the place. No one will notice extra paintings, right? And then you can go and pinch them when the fuss has died down."
"And how do you get them out, Nobby?"
"Well, first you get some glue and a really long stick and..." Fred Cullen shook his head.
"Can't see it happening, Nobby."
"All right then. You get some paint that's the same colour as the walls and you glue the paint into the wall somewhere it'll fit. And you paint over it with your wall paint so it looks just like wool."
"Got a convenient bit of wall in mind then?"
"How about inside the frame? That's there already, Sarge."
"Bloody hell, Nobby! That's clever,"
said Fred, stopping dead. "Thank you, Sarge. That means a lot, coming from you."
"But you still got to get it out, Nobby."
"Remember all those dust sheets, Sarge? I bet in a week's time a couple of blokes in overalls will be able to walk out of the place with a big white roll under their arms and no one would think twice about it, 'cause they'd be thinking the mural had been pinched weeks before." There were a few moments of silence before Sergeant Cullen said, in a hushed voice,
"That's a very dangerous mind you got there, Nobby. Very dangerous indeed. How do you get the new paint off, though?"
"Oh, that's easy," said Nobby. "And I know where to get some painters' aprons too."
"Nobby!"
said Fred, shocked. "All right, Sarge. You can't blame a man for dreaming, though."
"This could be a feather in our caps, Nobby. And we could do with one now."
"Your water playing up again, Sarge?"
"You may laugh, Nobby, but you've only got to look around," said Fred gloomily. "It's just gang fights now, but it's going to get worse. You mark my words. All this scrapping over something that happened thousands of years ago. I don't know why they don't go back to where they came from if they want to do that."
"Most of them come from here now," said Nobby. Fred grunted his disdain for a mere fact of geography.
"War, Nobby! Huh! What is it good for?"
he said. "Dunno, Sarge. Freeing slaves, maybe?"
Well, okay."
"Defending yourself from a totalitarian aggressor?"
"All right, I'll grant you that, but..."
"Saving civilizations against a horde of..."
"It doesn't do any good in the long run is what I'm saying, Nobby. If you'd listen for 5 seconds together,"
said Fred Cullen sharply. "Yeah, but in the long run, what does, Sarge?"
"Say that again, paying attention to every word, will you?" said Vimes.
"He's dead, sir. Ham Crusher is dead. The dwarves are sure of it." Vimes stared at his captain. Then he glanced at Sally and said,
"I gave you an order, Lance Constable Humpending. Go and get joined up."
When the girl had hurried out, he said, "I hope you're sure about it as well, Captain." It's spreading through the dwarves like... Carrot began.
Alcohol?
Vimes suggested. Very fast, anyway, Carrot conceded. Last night, they say, a troll got into his place in Treacle Street and beat him to death. I heard some of the lads talking about it.
Carrot, wouldn't we know if something like that had happened?
Said Vimes. But in the theatre of his mind, Angua and Fred Cullen uttered their Cassandraic warnings again. Cassandraic refers to accurately predicting misfortune or disaster, but having one's warnings disregarded or disbelieved, much like the mythological figure of Cassandra. It describes a person or situation where true prophecies or dire warnings are ignored by others, despite their accuracy. Origin: the term comes from Greek myth of Cassandra, a Trojan priestess who was given the gift of prophecy by the god Apollo. When she spurned him, Apollo cursed her so that her true prophecies would never be believed. Cassandraic.
Carrot, wouldn't we know if something like that had happened? Said Vimes.
But in the theatre of his mind, Angua and Fred Cullen uttered their Cassandraic warnings again. The dwarves knew something. The dwarves were worried. Don't we, sir? Said Carrot. I mean, I've just told you.
I mean, why aren't his people shouting it in the streets? Political assassination and all that sort of thing. Shouldn't they be screaming bloody murder? Who told you this?
Constable Ironbender and Corporal Ringfounder, sir. They're steady lads. Ringfounder's up for sergeant soon. There was something else, sir. I did ask them why we hadn't heard officially, and Ironbender said, "You won't like this, sir." He said the watch wasn't to be told. Carrot watched Vimes carefully. It was hard to see the change of expression on the commander's face, but certain small muscles said firmly.
"On whose orders?" said Vimes.
"Someone called Ardent, apparently. He's Ham Crusher's interpreter. I suppose you could say he says it's dwarf business."
"But this is Ankh-Morpork, Captain, and murder is murder."
"Yes, sir."
"And we are the City Watch," Vimes went on. "It says so on the door."
"Actually, it mostly says coppers are barstuds on the door at the moment, but I've got someone scrubbing it off," said Carrot.
That means if anyone gets murdered, we're responsible," said Vimes.
"I know what you mean, sir," said Carrot carefully.
"Does Veterinary know?"
"I can't imagine that he doesn't."
"Me neither."
Vimes thought for a moment.
"What about the Times? There's plenty of dwarves working there."
"I'd be surprised if they passed it on to humans, sir. I only got to hear about it because I'm a dwarf and Ringfounder really wants to make sergeant, and frankly I overheard them, but I doubt if the printing dwarves would mention it to the editor."
"Are you telling me, Captain, that dwarves in the watch would keep a murder secret?"
Carrot looked shocked. "Oh no, sir." "Good. They just keep it secret from humans. Sorry, sir." The important thing is not to shout at this point, Vimes told himself.
Do not, what do they call it, go spare? Treat this as a learning exercise. Find out why the world is not as you thought it was. Assemble the facts, digest the information, consider the implications.
then go spare, but with precision. Dwarves have always been law-abiding citizens, Captain, he said. They even pay their taxes. Suddenly, they think it's okay not to report a possible murder. Carrot could see the steely glint in Vimes's eyes. Well, the fact is, he began. Yes? You see, Ham Crusher is a deep-down dwarf, sir. I mean, really deep down. Hates coming to the surface. They say he lives at sub-basement level. I know all that. So, how far down does our jurisdiction go, sir? Said Carrot. What? As far down as we like? Does it say that anywhere, sir? Most of the dwarves here are from Copperhead and Lamedos and Uberwald, said Carrot. Those places have surface laws and underground laws. I know it's not the same here, but, well, it's how they see the world. And of course, Ham Crusher's dwarves are all deep downers, and you know how ordinary dwarves think about them. They come bloody close to worshipping them, Vimes thought, pinching the bridge of his nose and shutting his eyes. It just gets worse and worse. All right, he said. But this is Ankh-Morpork, and we have our own laws. There can be no harm in us just checking up on the health of Brother Ham Crusher, can there? We can knock on the door, can't we? Say, we've got good reason to ask. I know it's only a rumour, but if enough people believe a rumour like that, we will not be able to keep a lid on it. Good idea, sir. Go and tell Angua I want her along. And, Haddock and Ringfounder, maybe. You come too, of course. Not a good idea, sir. I happen to know most deep downers are nervous about me. They believe I'm too human to be a dwarf. Really? 6 feet 3 inches in his stockinged feet, thought Vimes, adopted and raised by dwarves in a little dwarf mine in the mountains. His dwarfish name is Gzadbat, which means headbanger. He coughed. Why on earth should they think that, I wonder? He said. All right. I know I'm technically human, sir, but size has traditionally never been a dwarfish definition of a dwarf. Ham Crusher's group aren't happy about me, though. Sorry to hear it. I'll take Sherry, then. Are you mad, sir? You know what they think about female dwarves who actually admit it? All right, then. I'll take Sergeant Detritus. They'll believe in him, all right, won't they? Could be said to be a bit provocative, sir. Carrot began doubtfully. Detritus is an Ankh-Morpork copper, Captain, just like you and me, said Vimes. I suppose I'm acceptable, am I? Yes, sir, of course. I think you worry them, though. I do? Oh, Vimes hesitated. Well, that's good. And Detritus is an officer of the law. We've still got some law here, and as far as I'm concerned, it goes deep. All the way down. Bloody stupid thing to say, Vimes thought 5 minutes later, as he walked through the streets at the head of the little squad. He cursed himself for saying it. Coppers stayed alive by trickery. That's how it worked. You had your watch houses with the big blue lights outside, and you made certain there were always burly watchmen visible in the big public places, and you swanked around like you owned the place. But you didn't own it. It was all smoke and mirrors. You magicked a little policeman into everyone's head. You relied on people giving in, knowing the rules. But in truth, 100 well-armed people could wipe out the watch if they knew what they were doing. Once some madman finds out that a copper taken unawares dies just like anyone else, the spell is broken. Ham Crusher's dwarfs don't believe in the city watch. That could turn out to be a problem. Maybe bringing a troll along was provocative, but Ditchitors was a citizen, God's damn it, just like everyone else. If you daddle-dum, daddle-dum, daddle-dum. Ah, yes, no matter how bad things were, there was always room for them to get just that little bit worse. He pulled the smart brown box out of his pocket and flipped it open. The pointy-eared face of a small green imp stared up at him with that wistful, hopeless smile which, in its various incarnations, he'd come to know and dread. "Good morning. Insert name here. I am the Disorganizer Mark 5, the Gooseberry," trademarked. "How may I?" it began, speaking fast in order to get as much said as possible before the inevitable interruption. "I swear I switched you off," said Vimes. "You threatened me with a hammer," said the imp accusingly, and rattled the tiny bars. "He threatens state of the craft technomancy with a hammer, everybody!" it shouted. "He doesn't even fill in the registration card! That's why I have to call him insert name." "I thought you'd got rid of that thing, sir," said Angua as Vimes snapped the lid shut. "I thought it had an accident," said a muffled voice from the box. "Sybil always gets me a new one," said Vimes, making a face. "A better one, but I know this one was turned off." The box's lid thrust upwards. "I wake up for alarms!" the imp shrieked. 10:45, sit for damn portrait!" Vimes groaned. The portrait with Sir Joshua. He'd get into trouble for this. He'd already missed 2 sittings, but this dwarf thing was important. "I won't be able to make it," he mumbled. "Then would you like to engage the handy-to-use Blue Nose, trademarked, integrated messenger service?" "What does that do?" said Vimes with deep suspicion. The succession of disorganizers he had owned had proved quite successful at very nearly sorting out all the problems that stemmed from owning them in the first place. Basically, it means me running with a message to the nearest Clacks Tower really fast," said the imp hopefully. "And do you come back?" said Vimes, hope also rising. "Absolutely!" "Thank you." "No," said Vimes. "How about a game of Splong?" trademarked. "Specially devised for the Mark 5? pleaded the imp. "I have the bats right here. No? Perhaps you would prefer the ever-popular Guess My Weight in Pigs. Or I could whistle one of your favorite tunes. My I hum, trademarked, function enables me to remember up to 1,500 of your all-time..." "You could try learning to use it, sir," said Angua, as Vimes once again shut the lid on the protesting voice. "No!" "Did use one," said Vimes. "Yep,
as a doorstop,
rumbled Detritus behind him. I'm just not at home with technomancy, all right? Said Vimes. End of discussion. Haddock, nip along to Moon Pond Lane, will you? Present my apologies to Lady Sybil, who will be at Sir Joshua's studio there. Tell her I'm very sorry, but this has come up and it needs careful handling. Well, it does, he thought, as they headed onward. It probably needs more careful handling than I'm going to give it. Well, to hell with that. It comes to something if you have to tread carefully, even to find out if there's been a murder. Treacle Street was just the kind of area the dwarves colonized. On the edge of the less pleasant parts of town, but not all the way there. You tended to notice the dwarf outposts. A patchwork of windows testified to a 2-story house having been turned into a 3-story house while remaining exactly the same height. An excess of small ponies pulling small carts, and of course, all the really short people wearing beards and helmets was a definite clue. Dwarves dug down too. It was a dwarf thing. Up here, far from the river, they could probably get to sub-basement level without being up to their necks in water. There were a lot of them out and about this morning. They weren't particularly angry, insofar as Vimes could tell, when the available area of expression between eyebrows and moustache was a few square inches, but it wasn't usual to see dwarves just standing around. They tended to be somewhere working hard, usually for one another. No, they weren't angry, but they were worried. You didn't need to see faces to sense that. Dwarves as a whole weren't happy about newspapers regarding such news as a lover of fine grapes would regard raisins. They got their news from other dwarves to ensure that it was new and fresh and full of personality. And no doubt it grew all kinds of extras in the telling. This crowd was waiting uncertainly for news that it was going to become a riot. For now, the crowd parted to let them through. The presence of detritus caused a wake of muttering, which the troll cleverly decided not to hear. Feel that? Said Angua, as they walked up the street. Through your feet? I don't have your senses, Sergeant, said Vimes. It's a constant thud underground, said Angua. I can feel the street shaking. I think it's a pump. Pumping out more cellars, maybe, said Vimes. Sounds like a big undertaking. How far down could they go? He wondered. Ankh-Morpork is mostly built on Ankh-Morpork after all. There's been a city here since forever. It wasn't just a random crowd when you looked closely. It was also a queue along one side of the street, moving very slowly towards a side door. They were waiting to see the Grags. Please come and say the death words over my father. Please advise me on the sale of my shop. Please guide me in my business. I am a long way from the bones of my grandfathers. Please help me stay a dwarf. This was not the time to be drkza, strictly speaking. Most Ankh-Morpork dwarves were drkza. It meant something like, not really a dwarf. They didn't live deep underground and come out only at night. They didn't mine metal. They let their daughters show at least a few indications of femininity. They tended to be a little slipshod when it came to some of the ceremonies, but the whiff of Koom Valley was in the air and this was no time to be mostly a dwarf. So you paid attention to the grags. They kept you on the straight seam. And until now, that had been fine by Vimes. Up until now, though, the grags in the city had stopped short of advocating murder. He liked dwarves. They made reliable officers and tended to be naturally law-abiding, at least in the absence of alcohol. But they were all watching him. He could feel the pressure of their gaze. Standing around watching people was, of course, Ankh-Morpork's leading industry. The place was a net exporter of penetrating stares, but these were the wrong kind. The street felt not exactly hostile, but alien. And yet it was an Ankh-Morpork street. How could he be a stranger here? Maybe I shouldn't have brought a troll, he thought. But where does that lead? Pick your own copper from a chart? 2 dwarves were on guard outside Ham Crusher's house. They were more heavily armed than the average dwarf, insofar as that was possible, but it was probably the black leather sashes they wore that were doing the trick of keeping the mood subdued. These declared to those who recognized them that they were working for deep-down dwarves and, as such, partook a little of the magic, mana, or fear that they engendered in the average backsliding dwarf. They started to give Vimes the look of all guards everywhere, which in summary is this. The default position is that you're dead. Only my patience stands in the way. But Vimes was ready for it. Any 5 hells you cared to name knew that he'd used it himself often enough. He countered with the aloof expression of someone who didn't notice guards. "Commander Vimes, City Watch," he said, holding up his badge. "I need to see Grag Ham Crusher immediately." "He's not seeing anyone," said one of the guards. "Oh, so he is dead then," said Vimes. He felt the answer. He didn't even have to see Angwar's little nod. The dwarves had been dreading the question and were sweating. To their shock and horror, and also somewhat to his own surprise, he sat down on the steps between them and pulled a packet of cheap cigars out of his pocket. "I won't offer one to you lads, because I know that you aren't allowed to smoke on duty," he said convivially. "I don't allow my boys to do it. The only reason I can get away with it is that there's no one to tell me off." He blew a stream of blue smoke. "Now, I am, as you know, head of the City Watch. Yes?" The 2 dwarves, staring straight ahead, both nodded imperceptibly. "Good," said Vimes. "And that means you, that's both of you, are impeding me in the execution of my duty. That gives me, a whole range of options. The one I'm thinking of right now is summoning Constable Dorful. He's a golem. Nothing impedes him in the execution of his duty, believe me. You'll be picking bits off that door, off the floor, for weeks, and I wouldn't stand in his way if I was you. Oh, and it'd be lawful, which means that if anyone puts up a fight, it gets really interesting. Look, I'm only telling you this because I've done my share of guarding over the years. And there are times when looking tough works, and there are times, and this, I suggest, is one of them, when going and asking the people inside what you should do next is a very good career move.
Can't leave our post,
said a dwarf. Don't worry about that, said Vimes, standing.
I'll stand guard for you. You can't do that.
Vimes bent down to the dwarf's ear. I am commander of the watch, he hissed, no longer Mr. Friendly. He pointed at the cobblestones. This is my street. I can stand where I like. You are standing on my street. It's the public highway. That means that there are about a dozen things I could arrest you for right now that would cause trouble, right enough. But you would be bang in the middle of it. My advice to you, one guard to another, is to hop off smartly and speak to someone further up the ladder, okay? He saw worried eyes peering out from between the rampant eyebrows and the luxuriant moustache, and spotted the tiny little tells he'd come to recognize, and added, Off you go, ma'am. The dwarf hammered on the door. The hatch slid back. Whispering transpired. The door opened. The dwarf hurried in. The door closed. Vimes turned, took up station beside it, and stood to attention slightly more theatrically than necessary. There were 1 or 2 outbreaks of laughter. Dwarves, they might be, but in Ankh-Morpork people always wanted to see what would happen next. The remaining guard hissed,
We're not allowed to smoke on duty.
Oops, sorry, said Vimes, and removed the cigar, tucking it behind his ear for later. This got a few more chuckles. Let 'em laugh, said Vimes to himself. At least they're not throwing things. The sun shone down. The crowd stood still. Sergeant Angua stared at the sky, her face carefully blank. Detritus had settled into the absolute rock-like stillness of a troll with nothing to do right now. Only Ringfounder looked uneasy. This probably was not a good time and a place to be a dwarf with a badge, Vimes thought. But why? All we've been doing in the last couple of weeks is trying to stop 2 bunches of idiots from killing one another. And now this morning was going to cost him an earful, he thought. Although, in fact, Sybil never shouted when she told him off. She just spoke sadly, which was a lot worse. The bloody family portrait. That was the trouble. It seemed to involve an awful lot of sittings, but it was a tradition of Sybil's family, and that was that. It was more or less the same portrait, every generation. The happy family group against a panorama of their rolling acres. Vimes had no rolling acres, only aching feet, but as the inheritor of the ramekin wealth he was, he'd learned, also the owner of Crundles, a huge, stately home out in the country. He hadn't even seen it yet. Vimes didn't mind the countryside if it stayed put and didn't attack, but he liked pavement under his feet and didn't much care for being pictured as some kind of squire. So far his excuses for avoiding the interminable sittings had been reasonable. but it was a close-run thing. More time passed. Some of the dwarves in the crowd wandered off. Vimes didn't move, not even when he heard the hatch in the door open for a moment and then slid back. They were trying to wait him out.
Cha-cha, rump tiddle, 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 tiddle-et chum-chum.
Without looking down, maintaining the stolid 1,000-mile stare of a guard, Vimes pulled the disorganizer out of his pocket and raised it to his lips.
I know you were turned off, he grunted.
Pop up for alarms, remember, said the imp.
How do I stop you doing that?
The correct form of words is in the manual. Insert name here, said the imp primly.
Where is the manual?
You threw it away, said the imp, full of reproach. You always do. That's why you never use the right commands. And that is why I did not go away and stick my head up a duck's bottom yesterday. You have an appointment to see Lord Veterinary in half an hour.
I will be busy, muttered Vimes.
Would you like me to remind you again in 10 minutes?
Tell me, what part of stick your head up a duck's bottom didn't you understand?
Vimes replied and plunged the thing back into his pocket. So, it had been half an hour. Half an hour was enough. This was going to be drastic, but he'd seen the looks the dwarves were giving detritus. Rumour was an evil poison. As he stepped forward, ready to go and summon Doleful, and all the problems that invading this place would entail, the door opened behind him.
Commander Vimes, you may come in.
There was a dwarf in the doorway. Vimes could just make out his shape in the gloom, and for the first time he noticed the symbol chalked on the wall over the door. A circle with a horizontal line through it.
Sergeant Angua will accompany me, he said.
The sign struck Vimes as vaguely unsettling. It seemed to be a stamp of ownership that was rather more emphatic than, for example, a little plaque saying, Mon repose.
The troll will stay outside, said the figure flatly. Sergeant Detritus will stand guard along with Corporal Ringfounder, said Vimes.
This restatement of fact seemed to pass muster, suggesting that the dwarf probably knew a lot about iron, but nothing about irony. The door opened further, and Vimes stepped inside. The hall was bare, except for a few stacked boxes, and the air smelled of, stale food? Old empty houses, sealed up rooms, attics. The whole house is an attic, thought Vimes. The thud from below was really noticeable here. It was like a heartbeat.
This way, if you please,
said the dwarf, and ushered Vimes and Angua into a side room. Again, the only furnishings were more wooden boxes and, here and there, some well-worn shovels.
We do not often entertain. Please be patient, said the dwarf, and backed out. The key clicked in the lock. Click.
Vimes sat down on a box.
Polite, said Angua.
Vimes put one hand to his ear and jerked a thumb towards the damp, stained plaster. She nodded, but mouthed the word corpse and pointed downwards.
Sure,
said Vimes. Angua tapped her nose. You couldn't argue with a werewolf's nose. Vimes leaned back against a bigger box. It was comfort itself to a man who'd learned to sleep leaning against any available wall. The plaster on the opposite wall was crumbling, green with damp and hung with dusty old spider webs. Someone, though, had scratched a symbol in it so deeply that bits of the plaster had fallen out. It was another circle, this time with 2 diagonal lines slashed through it. Some passion there, not what you'd expect around dwarves. "You are taking this very well, sir," said Angua. "You must know this is deliberate discourtesy." "Being rude isn't against the law, Sergeant." Vimes pulled his helmet over his eyes and settled down. "The little devils! Play silly buggers with me, will they? Try to wind me up, will they? Don't tell the watch, eh? There are no no-go areas in this city. I'll see to it they find that out. Oh, yes." There were more and more of the deep downers in the city these days, although you very seldom saw them outside the dwarf areas. Even there, you didn't actually see any of them as such. You just saw their dusty black sedan chairs being muscled through the crowds by 4 other dwarves. There were no windows. There was nothing outside that a deep downer could possibly want to see. The city dwarves regarded them with awe, respected, and, it had to be said, a certain amount of embarrassment, like some honored but slightly loopy relative. Because somewhere in the head of every city dwarf there was a little voice that said, "You should live in a mine. You should be in the mountains. You shouldn't walk under open skies. You should be a real dwarf." In other words, you shouldn't really be working in your uncle's pigment and dye factory in Dolly Sisters. However, since you are, you could at least try to think like a proper dwarf. And part of that meant being guided by the deep downers, the dwarves as dwarves, who live in caves miles below the surface and never see the sun. Somewhere down there in the dark was true dwarfishness. They had the knowing of it, and they could guide you. Vimes had no problem with that at all. It made as much sense as what most humans believed, and most dwarves were model citizens, even at 2/3 scale. But deciding that murder could be kept in the family, thought Vimes, not on my watch. After 10 minutes, the door was unlocked, and another dwarf stepped inside. He was dressed as what Vimes thought of as standard city dwarf, which meant basic helmet, leather, chainmail, and battle axe/mining pick, but hold the spiky club. He also had a black sash and looked flustered. "Commander Vimes, what can I say? I do apologize for the way you have been treated." "I bet you do," aloud Vimes said. "And who are you?" "Apologies again. I am Helmclever, and I am the nearest word is perhaps daylight face. I do those things that have to be done above ground. Do come into my office, please." He trotted off, leaving them to follow him. The office was downstairs in the stone-walled basement. It looked quite cozy. Crates and sacks were piled up against one wall. There wasn't much food in deep caves, after all. The simple life for dwarves down below happened because of quite complex lives for a lot of dwarves above. Helmclever looked like little more than a servant, making sure that his masters were fed, although he probably thought the job was rather grander than that. A curtain in the corner probably concealed a bed. Dwarves did not go in for dainty living. A desk was covered in paperwork. Beside it, on a small table, was an octagonal board covered in little plain pieces. Vimes sighed. He hated games. They made the world look too simple.
"Oh, do you play at all, Commander?" said Helmclever, with the hungry look of a true enthusiast.
Vimes knew the type too. Show polite interest and you'd be there all night.
"Lord Veterinary does. It's never interested me," said Vimes.
Footnote 4. Vimes had never got on with any game much more complex than darts. Chess, in particular, had always annoyed him. It was the dumb way the pawns went off and slaughtered their fellow pawns, while the kings lounged about doing nothing, that always got to him.
If only the pawns united, maybe talk the rooks round, the whole board could have been a republic in a dozen moves.
End footnote 4.
"Lord Veterinary does. It's never interested me," said Vimes. "Helmcleaver's not a common dwarf name. You're not related to the Helmcleavers in Tallow Lane, are you?"
He'd meant it as no more than a bit of non-controversial ice-breaking, but he might as well have cursed. Helmclever looked down and mumbled,
Yes, but to a grug, even a novice of all dwarfdom is his family. It would not be, really not be."
He faltered into silence, and then some other part of his brain took over. He looked up brightly.
"Some coffee, perhaps? I shall fetch some."
Vimes opened his mouth to say no, but didn't. Dwarves made good coffee, and there was a smell of it wafting from the next room. Besides, the nervousness radiating off Helmcleaver suggested he'd been drinking a lot of it today. No harm in encouraging him to have more. It was something he told his officers. People got worried around coppers if the officer knew his stuff, and jittery people gave too much away. While the dwarf was gone, he took in more of the room, and his eye spotted the words, "The Koom Valley Codex," on the spine of a book, half concealed in the paperwork. That bloody valley again, with added weirdness this time. Actually, Sybil had bought a copy, along with most of the reading population of the city, and had dragged him along to look at that poor man's wretched picture in the Royal Art Museum. A painting with secrets? Oh, yes. And how come some mad young human artist 100 years ago knew the secret of a battle fought thousands of years before? Sybil said that the book claimed he'd found something on the battlefield, but it was haunted, and voices drove him to believe he was a chicken, or something. When the mugs were brought in, with just a little spilled on Helmcleaver's desk, because his hand was shaking, Vimes said, "I must see Greg Hamcrusher, sir." "I'm sorry, that is not possible." The answer came out flat and level, as if the dwarf had been practicing. But there was a flicker in his eyes, and Vimes glanced up at a very large grill in the wall. At this point, Angua gave a little cough. Okay, thought Vimes, someone's listening. "Mr. Helmcleaver," he said, "I have reason to suppose that a serious crime has been committed on Ankh-Morpork soil," he added. "That is to say, under it. But Ankh-Morpork's, anyway." Once again, Helm Cleaver's strange calm gave him away. There was a hunted look in his eyes. I am sorry to hear it. How may I assist you to solve it? Oh well, thought Vimes. I did say I don't play games. By showing me the dead body you have downstairs, he said. He was obscenely pleased at the way Helm Cleaver deflated. Time to press home. He took out his badge. My authority, Mr. Helm Cleaver. I will search this place. I would prefer to do so with your permission. The dwarf was trembling, with fear or anxiety, or probably both. You will invade our premises? You cannot! Dwarf law! This is Ankh-Morpork, said Vimes. All the way to the top. All the way to the bottom. Invasion is not the issue. Are you really telling me I cannot search a basement? Now take me to Greg Hamcrusher or whoever is in charge. Now! I refuse your request. It wasn't a request. And now we reach our own little Koom Valley, Vimes thought, as he stared into Helm Cleaver's eyes. No backing down. We both think we're right, but he's wrong. A movement made him glance down. Helm Cleaver's trembling finger had teased out the spilled coffee into a circle. As Vimes stared, the dwarf's finger drew 2 lines across the circle. He looked back up into eyes bulging with anger, fear, and just a hint of something else. Ah, Commander Vimes, is it? Said a figure in the doorway. It might have been Lord Veterinary speaking. It was that same level tone, indicating that he had noticed you and you were, in some small way, a necessary chore. But it was coming from another dwarf, presumably, although he wore a rigid, pointed black hood which brought him up to the height of the average human. Elsewhere he was completely shrouded, and that was the well-chosen word, in overlapping black leather scales, with just a narrow slit for the eyes. Were it not for the quiet authority of the voice, the figure in front of Vimes could be mistaken for a very somber Hog's Watch decoration. And you are, said Vimes. My name is Ardent, Commander. Helm Cleaver, go about your chores. As the daylight face scuttled off at speed, Vimes turned in his seat and allowed his hand to brush across the sticky symbol, wiping it out. And do you want to be helpful too? He said. If I can be, said the dwarf. Please, follow me. It would be preferable if the sergeant did not accompany you. Why? The obvious reason, said Ardent. She is openly female. What? So? Sergeant Angua is very definitely not a dwarf, said Vimes. You can't expect everyone to conform to your rules. Why not? Said the dwarf. You do. But could we just, together, for a moment, proceed to my office and discuss matters? I'll be fine, sir, said Angua. It's probably the best way. Vimes tried to relax. He knew he was letting himself get steamed up. Those silent watchers in the street had got through to him, and the look he'd got from Helm Cleaver needed some thinking about. But, no, he said. You will not make that small concession? Said Ardent. I am already making several big ones, believe me, said Vimes. The hidden eyes under the pointy cowl stared at him for a few seconds. Very well, said Ardent. Please follow me. The dwarf turned and opened the door behind him, stepping into a small square room. He beckoned them to follow and, when they were inside, pulled a lever. The room shook gently and the walls began to rise. This is, Ardent began. An elevator, said Vimes. Yes, I know. I saw them when I met the Low King in Uberwald. The dropping of the name did not work. The Low King is not respected here, said Ardent. I thought he was the ruler of all dwarves, said Vimes. A common misconception. Ah, we have arrived. The elevator stopped with barely a jerk. Vimes stared. Ankh-Morpork was built on Ankh-Morpork. Everyone knew that. They had been building with stone here 10,000 years ago, as the annual flooding of the Ankh brought more silt. So the city had risen on its walls until attics had become cellars. Even at basement level today, it was always said, a man with a pickaxe and a good sense of direction could cross the city by knocking his way through underground walls, provided he could also breathe mud. What had this place been? A palace? The temple of a god who'd subsequently slipped everyone's memory? It was a big space, dark as soot, but there was a glow that managed to show up beautiful vaulting in the roof above. A strange glow. Worms, said Ardent, from the deep caves in the mountains around Liamedos. We brought them with us, and they breed very fast here. They find your silk quite nourishing. I'm sure they shine more too. The glow moved. It did not illuminate much, but it showed up the shape of things, and it was heading towards the elevator, following over the wonderful ceiling. They head for heat and movement, even now, said the hooded dwarf. Why? Ardent gave a little laugh. In case you die, Commander. They think you are some rat or small deer that has tumbled into the cave. Nourishment is rare in the deeps. Every breath you exhale is food. And when eventually you expire, they will descend. They are very patient. They will leave nothing but bones. I was not intending to expire here, said Vimes. Of course not. Follow me, please, said Ardent, leading them past a big round door. There were more on the other side of the room, and several gaping tunnel mouths. How far down are we? Not far. About 40 feet. We are good at digging. In this city, said Vimes. Why aren't we trying to breathe underwater? And calling it water is giving it the best of it. We are very good at keeping water out too. Alas, it appears we are less good at keeping out Samuel Vimes. The dwarf stepped into a smaller room, its ceiling thick with brilliant worms, and motioned to a couple of dwarf-sized chairs. Do sit down. Can I offer you refreshment? No, thank you, said Vimes. He sat down gingerly on a chair that brought his knees up almost to his chin. Ardent sat down behind a small desk made of stone slabs and, to Vimes's amazement, took off his headgear. He looked quite young, with a beard that was actually trimmed. "How far do all these tunnels run?" Vimes said.
"I don't propose to tell you," said Ardent levelly.
"So, you're undermining my city?"
"Oh, Commander, you've been to the caves in Uberwald. You've seen how dwarfs can build. We are craftsmen. Do not think that your house is about to collapse."
"But you're not just building basements, you're mining," said Vimes.
"In a sense, we would say we are mining for holes. Space, Commander. That is what we are digging for. Yes, we are mining for holes, although our bores have found deep treacle. You will be interested to hear."
"You can't do this."
"Can we not? But we are doing it, nevertheless," said Ardent calmly.
"You are burrowing under other people's property?"
"Rabbits burrow, Commander. We dig. And yes, we are. How far down does ownership go, after all? And how far up?"
Vimes looked at the dwarf. "Calm down," he thought. "You can't deal with this. This is too big. It's something for veterinary to decide. Stick to what you know. Stick to what you can deal with." "I'm investigating reports of a death," he said.
"Yes, Grug Hamcrusher. A terrible misfortune,"
said Ardent with a calmness that was enraging. "I've heard it was a vicious murder."
"That would be a fair description."
"You admit it?" said Vimes.
"I'll choose to assume that you mean by that. Do I admit there has been a murder, Commander?" "Yes, there has, and we are dealing with it."
"How?"
"We are discussing the appointment of a Zadgrga," said Ardent, folding his hands. "That is, one who smelts. One who finds the pure ore of truth in the dross of confusion."
"Discussing? Have you sealed off the scene of the crime yet?"
"The smelter may order that, Commander. But we already know that the crime was committed by a troll."
Ardent's face now bore an expression of amused contempt that Vimes longed to remove. "How do you know this? Was it witnessed?"
"Not as such, but a troll's club was found beside the body," said the dwarf.
"And that's all you have to go on?" Vimes stood up. "I've had enough of this. Sergeant Angua!"
"Sir,"
said Angua beside him. "Let's go. We're going to find the murder scene while there's still any clues left to find."
"You have no business in the lower areas,"
snapped Ardent, standing up. "How are you going to stop me?"
"How are you going to get past locked doors?"
"How are you going to find out who murdered Hamcrusher?"
"I told you! A troll club was found."
"And that's it? We found a club, so a troll did it? Is anyone going to believe that? You're prepared to start a war in my city with a piece of flim-flam like that? Because, believe me, that's what's going to happen when this gets out. Try it, and I'll arrest you."
"And start a war in your city?"
said Ardent. Dwarf and man glared at one another while they got their breath. On the ceiling above them, verms congregated, feasting on spittle and rage.
"Why would anyone but a troll strike down the grug?" said Ardent.
"Good! You're asking questions!" Vimes leaned across the desk. "If you really want answers, unlock those doors!"
"No! You cannot go down there! Blackboard monitor Vimes!"
The dwarf could not have put more venom in the words. child murderer. Vimes stared. Blackboard monitor. Well, he had been in that little street school more than 45 years ago. Mum had insisted. Gods knew where she'd sprung the penny a day it cost, although most of the time Dame Slightly had been happy to accept payment in old clothes and firewood, or preferably gin. Numbers, letters, weights, measures, it was not what you'd call a rich curriculum. Vimes had attended for 9 months or so until the streets demanded he learn much harder and sharper lessons. But for a while, he'd been trusted to hand out the slates and clean the blackboard. Oh, the heady, strutting power of it when you're 6 years old.
Do you deny it?
Said Ardent.
You destroy written words? You admitted as much to the Low King in Uberworld. It was a joke, said Vimes. Oh, then you do deny it.
What?
No, he was impressed by my titles, and I just threw that one in for fun. Then you deny the crime?
Ardent persisted.
Crime? I cleaned the blackboard so that new things could be written on it. How is that a crime? You did not care where those words went, said Ardent. Care? They were just chalk dust.
Ardent sighed and rubbed his eyes.
Busy night? Said Vimes. Commander, I understand that you were young and may not have realized what you were doing, but you must understand that to us, you appear to be proud of being complicit in the most heinous of crimes, the destruction of words.
Sorry, rubbing out A is for apple is a capital crime.
One that would be unthinkable for a true dwarf, said Ardent.
Really? But I have the trust of the Low King himself, said Vimes.
So I understand. There are 6 venerable Grugs below us, Commander. And in their eyes, the Low King and his kind have strayed from the true seam. He is,
Ardent rattled off a sentence in staccato dwarfish too fast for Vimes to catch it, and then translated,
wishy-washy, dangerously liberal, shallow. He has seen the light.
Ardent was watching him carefully. Think hard. From what Vimes could remember, the Low King and his circle had been pretty crusty types. These people think they're soppy liberals. Wishy-washy, he said.
Indeed. I invite you, therefore, to derive from that statement something of the nature of those I serve below.
Ah, thought Vimes, there's something there. Just a hint. Friend Ardent is a thinker. When you say, he has seen the light, you sound as if you mean corrupted, he said.
Something like that, yes. Different worlds, Commander. Down here, it would be unwise to trust your metaphors. To see the light is to be blinded. Do you not know that in darkness the eyes open wider?
Take me to see these people down below, said Vimes.
They will not listen to you. They will not even look at you. They have nothing to do with the world above. They believe it is a kind of bad dream. I have not dared to tell them about your newspapers, printed every day and discarded like rubbish. The shock would kill them.
But dwarves invented the printing engine, Vimes thought. Obviously, they were the wrong kind of dwarf. I've seen Sherry throw stuff in the waste paper bin too. It seems like nearly all dwarves are the wrong sort, eh? What exactly is your job, Mr. Ardent? Said Vimes.
I am their chief liaison with the world above. The steward, you could say.
I thought that was Helmcleaver's job.
Helmcleaver? He orders the groceries, relays my orders, pays the miners and so on. The chores, in fact,
said Ardent disdainfully.
He is a novice, and his job is to do what I tell him. It is I who speak for the Grugs.
You talk to Bad Dreams on their behalf?
You could put it that way, I suppose. They would not let a proud word killer become a smelter. The idea would be abominable.
They glared at one another. Once again, we end up in Koom Valley, Vimes told himself.
They won't.
Permission to make a suggestion, said Angua quietly. Two heads turned. Two mouths said,
Well?
The smelter, the seeker of truth, must they be a dwarf?
Of course,
said Ardent. Then what about Captain Carrot? He's a dwarf.
We know of him. He is an anomaly,
said Ardent.
His claim to dwarfishness is debatable.
But most dwarves in the city accept that he's a dwarf, said Angua. And he's a copper too. Ardent flopped back into his seat.
To your dwarves here, yes, he is a dwarf. He would be unacceptable to the Grugs.
There's no dwarf law that says a dwarf can't be more than 6 feet tall, sir.
The Grugs are the law, woman,
Ardent snapped.
They interpret laws that go back for tens of thousands of years.
Well, ours don't, said Vimes. But murder is murder anywhere. The news has got out. You've already got the dwarves and the trolls simmering nicely, and this will bring it all right to the boil.
Do you want a war? With the trolls? That is...
No, with this city. A place inside the walls where the law doesn't run. His lordship won't accept that one.
You would not dare.
Look into my eyes, said Vimes.
There are far more dwarves than there are watchmen,
said Ardent, but the amused expression had fled. So, what you are telling me is that law is just a matter of numbers, said Vimes. I thought you dwarves practically worship the idea of law. Is numbers all it is? I'll swear in more men then. Trolls too. They're citizens just like me. Are you sure every dwarf is on your side? I'll raise the regiments. I'll have to. I know how things run in Lamados and Uberwald, but they don't run like that here. One law, Mr. Ardent. That's what we've got. If I let people slam their front door on it, I might as well shut down the watch. Vimes walked to the doorway. That's my offer. Now I'm going back to the yard. Wait! Ardent sat staring at the desktop, drumming his fingers on it.
I do not have seniority here, he said.
Let me talk to your Grags. I promise to rub out no words.
No, they will not talk to you. They do not talk to humans. They are waiting below. They had word of your arrival. They are frightened. They do not trust humans.
Why?
Because you are not dwarves, said Ardent. Because you are a sort of dream.
Vimes put his hands on the dwarf's shoulders. Then let's go downstairs where you can talk to them about nightmares, he said, and you can point out which one is me. There was a long silence until Ardent said,
Very well. This is under protest.
You understand? I'll be happy to make a note of that, said Vimes. Thank you for your cooperative attitude. Ardent stood up and produced a ring of complex keys from his robes. Cling, cling, cling. Vimes tried to keep track of the journey, but it was hard. There were twists and turns in dim tunnels that all seemed alike. There was not a trace of water anywhere. How far did the tunnels go? How far down? How far out? Dwarves mined through granite. They could probably stroll through river mud. In fact, in most places, the dwarves hadn't so much mined as cleaned house, taking away the silt, tunneling from one ancient dripping room to another, and somehow the water went away. There were things glittering, possibly magical, half seen in dark archways as they passed, an odd chanting. He knew dwarfish in the axe of my aunt is in your head kind of way, and it didn't sound like that at all. It sounded like short words rattled out at very high speed. And with every turn he felt the anger coming back. They were being led in circles, were they? For no other reason than pique. Pique, P-I-Q-U-E, to excite or arouse, especially by a provocation, challenge or rebuff. Pique, pride. Pique, to arouse anger or resentment in. Irritate. Pique. For no other reason than pique. Ardent forged ahead, leaving Vimes to blunder along behind and occasionally bump his head. His temper was bubbling. This was nothing more than a bloody runaround. The dwarves didn't care about the law, about him, about the world up above. They undermine our city, and they don't obey our laws. There's been a damn murder. He admits it. Why am I putting up with this stupid play acting? He was passing yet another tunnel mouth, but this one had a piece of board nailed across it. He pulled out his sword, shink, yelled, I wonder what's down here, smashed the board and set off down the tunnel with Angua following. Is this wise, sir? She whispered as they plunged along. No, but I'm up to here with Mr. Ardent, Vimes growled. I tell you, another twisty tunnel, and I'll be back here with the heavy mob, politics or not. Calm down, sir. Well, everything he says and does is an insult and makes my blood boil, said Vimes, striding onwards and ignoring the shouts of Ardent behind him. There's a door ahead, sir. All right, I'm not blind, just half blind, Vimes snapped. He reached out. The big round door had a wheel in its center, and dwarf runes chalked all over it. Can you read them, Sergeant? Mortal danger. Flooding. No entry, said Angua. More or less, sir. They are pressure doors. I've seen these used before in other mines. Chain shut too, said Vimes, reaching out. Looks like solid iron. Ow! Sir? Gash my hand on a nail! Vimes rammed his hand into a pocket, where, without fail, Sybil saw to it that a clean handkerchief was lodged on a daily basis. A nail in an iron door, sir, said Angua, looking closely. A rivet, then. Can't see a thing in this gloom. Why they... You must follow me. This is a mine. There are dangers, said Ardent, catching up with them. You still get flooding, said Vimes. It is to be expected. We know how to cope. Now stay close to me. It'd be more inclined to do that, sir, if I thought we were taking a direct route, said Vimes.
Otherwise, I might look for shortcuts.
We are nearly there, Commander, said Ardent, walking away. Nearly there.